Hello everybody, I'm Seth Weissman and welcome to another episode of Safe Real Estate. Today I want to talk about sellers who prematurely terminate contracts due to what appears to be an inability of the buyer to complete the real estate transaction. And if sellers prematurely terminate, it may actually create a situation where the seller is breaching the contract, not the buyer. And here's the scenario that we are seeing on a fairly regular basis. The buyer agent calls the listing agent and says something like, "Gosh, it looks like my buyer is not going to be able to complete the transaction. They're running into financing issues," but the buyer does not terminate, and the buyer continues to try to obtain financing. Sometimes the buyer agent calls and says, "The house which the buyer needed to sell has not sold. The contract fell apart. We're not sure that the buyer is going to be able to complete the transaction." And the seller, rather than waiting for the closing date to come and go, goes ahead and sends a termination notice. And in that instance, the seller has breached the contract because the buyer has up until the closing date to fulfill the terms of the contract. So it's really creating a situation where the seller may have ended up with the earnest money, but because the seller has terminated prematurely, they don't get the earnest money. The earnest money goes back to the buyer. So what the seller wants to do is wait and allow the buyer to try to perform. And frankly, my advice is to wait for the closing date to come and go, and then the next day, the seller can send a letter saying, "You didn't appear at the closing. I understand you were not able to get your financing, but technically you have breached the contract, and therefore we are terminating due to the buyer's breach." If the seller follows those steps, the seller will have acted in full accordance with the contract. I hope this episode of Safe Real Estate has been beneficial. As always, it's great to see y'all. Please continue to tune in. Bye now.